A rope runs the whole length of this room, wall to wall, pulled tight at about the height of a sitting man's chest, and there are 40 men asleep on the bench beneath it, folded right forward over that rope, hanging into the dark like washing on a line. Every single one of them paid 2 pence for this tonight. Not for the bench, you understand. They paid for the rope. Then at 5 in the morning, a man walks the length of the row with a knife in his hand, and he cuts it. The whole line goes down at once. 40 men dropping together onto the boards. That is how you are woken up in this place. This is London, the largest, richest, most powerful city that has ever existed anywhere on earth. And the year is 1888. So before anything else, before the work or the food or the dying, you need to understand exactly what a single night indoors costs a man here. 1 penny buys you a bench in a room with a fire in it, and you are not permitted to lie down on that bench, not once, all night. 2 pence buys you the rope. That is the upgrade. It means you can sleep sitting upright without folding forward onto the floor in the dark. And 4 pence buys you a narrow wooden box, shaped near enough exactly like a coffin, with a sheet of waxed oilcloth thrown over you for a blanket. Sometimes, for that 4 pence, there is a cup of tea and a piece of bread waiting for you when they wake you in the morning. Now, these are not slums that nobody planned. These are businesses run for profit. Every single level of misery in this city has a price on it, and if you have an actual room of your own, it does not sit on the main street. It sits in a court, hidden behind it, reached through a covered passage. The Old Nickel up in Bethnal Green holds 5,700 people across roughly 30 streets of ground. Not 30 streets of houses, though. 30 streets of courts, alleys, passages, and blind turnings that stop dead against a wall. 40 years before this, that same patch of ground carried 1,400 separate dwellings packed inside 400 square yards. 8 people to a dwelling was the average figure recorded. And remember what an average means. That is the middle, not the worst of it. Your walls run with water. Not damp in the corners, not a stain in the plaster. Running, in a visible film, all day and all night. There is no drainage here of any kind whatsoever. So whatever you pour out of your door simply stands there in the yard until it soaks away or freezes. The ground under all of this was dug out for brick clay years ago, which means the yards hold permanent standing ponds of black water that never move. And those ponds are fed continuously by everything that every house standing around them throws out. Nobody comes to empty them. Nobody ever will. Now, the single tap serving that court runs for 10 to 12 minutes in a day. Not 10 minutes each. 10 minutes for the entire court, for every family in it. So you queue with a bucket and you wait your turn. And whatever you fail to collect inside those 10 minutes, you simply go without, for drinking, for cooking, for washing, until tomorrow. Rent is collected weekly, in person at the door, and no notice of any kind is legally required to put you and everything you own out onto the street. You share that room with other people, and in the winter months you genuinely want to, because other bodies are the only heating you're going to get. There is one privy out in the yard, and it serves every single house standing around that yard. 20 families, sometimes more than that. It overflows constantly, into the yard, into the standing water, and that is not a failure of the arrangement. That is the arrangement working as built. So, you have somewhere to sleep tonight. Good. Now you have to find a way to pay for the whole thing all over again tomorrow, and the work that is actually available to a man in your position is considerably stranger than anything you are currently imagining. London in 1888 runs on horses. There are roughly 300,000 of them working these streets every single day of the year, and 300,000 working horses produce somewhere in the region of 1,000 tons of dung, not in a month, in a day. It is not cleared away. There is no system for clearing it. It is trodden flat by wheels and hooves and feet until it simply becomes the road surface itself. In dry weather it lifts off the ground as a fine brown dust that hangs in the air. You breathe that in. It settles on the food in the market stalls, and in wet weather the whole street turns into a brown liquid, several inches deep, running from wall to wall with nowhere at all to drain away to. So naturally, a trade exists to deal with it. A child with a broom takes up a position at a street corner and waits there all day. And when somebody well-dressed wants to cross, that child runs ahead of them and sweeps a clean path straight through the filth from one curb to the other. Then waits, with a hand held out, for a coin that may very well never come. There is no wage. That is the entire job. One survey of this city counted 7 separate and distinct categories of crossing sweeper working its streets. 7 grades of the same desperate idea. Below that trade there is the river. Twice a day, the Thames pulls right back and uncovers its own bed for a few hours, and children go down onto that bed to work it while the tide is out. They are called mudlarks, and there are hundreds of them. They are hunting for lumps of coal, lengths of rope, bent nails, and any scrap of copper or iron at all that somebody somewhere might pay them for. And the mud they are standing barefoot in, for hours, is quite literally everything this city has emptied into that river, including the sewers. Below the mudlarks are the sewers themselves, and there are men in this city who go down into them on purpose, in the dark, hunting. They are called toshers. They carry a long-handled net and a shuttered lantern, and they work the tunnels looking for coins dropped through the gratings. It pays better than most honest trades above ground do. Considerably better, and that of course is exactly the point of it. It also kills them, regularly and in numbers, by pockets of gas, by tunnel collapse, and by the tide coming back in behind them in the dark. And then there is the trade that nobody quite believes the first time they hear anybody describe it out loud. The tanneries of this city need an alkaline agent to soften a raw hide and strip the hair from it before it can be turned into leather. They use dog faces, and the trade name for it, used openly in the markets, in the ledgers without a trace of irony anywhere, is pure. So there are people who walk these streets all day collecting it into a bucket, and then sell it on to the tanneries by weight, like coal. They follow anybody walking a dog. They stand and they wait. This is not a joke, and it is not begging. It is a recognized London occupation. Others collect bones off doorsteps, out of refuse heaps, out of gutters, and carry them in a sack right across the city to the bone mills. Those bones are crushed and become soap and fertilizer for the fields that feed this same city. And a good day of it pays about 6 pence, for an entire day of that. And remember, that is the trade on a good day, with a full sack, not on a bad one. Now understand this clearly. None of these people are unemployed. Every single one of them has worked a full day today, and will again tomorrow. So that is how the money comes in. Now watch, very carefully, what that money actually buys a family in this city. Because the food being sold in London in 1888 is not remotely what it is being sold as. Bread is the meal. Not a part of the meal, not something alongside it. On most days of your working life, bread is the entire meal. White bread costs more than brown bread does, and always has, which means white bread is what everybody in this city wants to be able to buy. Now alum will turn cheap dark flour a convincing white, but it does something else as well, something more useful to a baker. It makes the loaf hold water, and water is weight, and weight is price. So the baker adds his alum, and then he sells you water by the pound and calls it bread. In the 1850s, a doctor named Arthur Hill Hassell started buying food samples across London and examining them for the Lancet, more than 2,500 separate samples, every one of them under a microscope, one single sample at a time for 3 years. And about half of all the bread he tested carried a considerable quantity of alum in it. Half, not half of the worst bakeries in the poorest districts. Half of the bread in London. Everywhere at every price, in every shop. And alum is the mild version of this. It binds up the gut. It blocks the absorption of what little nutrition is there. And it quietly starves growing children. Beyond the alum, bakers were caught using chalk, slaked lime, plaster of Paris, and finely ground animal bone. All of it simply to add weight and whiteness. Pipe clay, boiled potato, and sulfate of copper, added deliberately to make the crust of the loaf take on exactly the right golden color. Mustard was colored using lead chromate, for the straightforward reason that real mustard is a dull, grayish, thoroughly unimpressive sort of yellow. Wine and cider were sweetened using lid. Not by accident, not from the pipes added. Because lid genuinely does taste sweet on the tongue. And the boiled sweets sold to children out of jars in every corner shop in this city were colored using copper and lead salts. Bright emerald green, bright scarlet, bright acid yellow, and the brighter that sweet looked in the jar, the more of it was in there. Now here is the part that should genuinely bother you. A chemist named Friedrich Oakum published every bit of this, in detail back in 1820, and the trade he exposed ran him out of London within a couple of years of him printing it, ruined him, drove him out of the country, after which precisely nothing was done about any of it, by anybody, for roughly the next 30 years. So you are not being poisoned here by accident or by ignorance or by bad luck. You are being poisoned deliberately for the margin. And you cannot taste a single bit of it, not one, because tasting like nothing at all is precisely what these additives were chosen for. So the food is working against you slowly, across years, wearing you down by degrees, and you will never once notice it happening to you. The next three things work considerably faster than that, and the first of them is waiting inside a factory, out in the east of the city. In Bow, out in the east end of London, there is a match factory. It is called Bryant and May, and it is one of the largest in the country. It employs around 1,400 women and girls, and some of those girls are 14 years old, working full shifts, 6 days a week. Matches at this date are made using white phosphorus, because white phosphorus ignites at the slightest friction against almost any surface. That is the entire selling point of the product, and it is also precisely the reason that this factory is killing the people who work in it. Heated phosphorus gives off a vapor, and these women spend their whole working day, every day, breathing inside that vapor with no protection at all. It gets in through the teeth, through a cavity, through an old extraction, through the smallest crack in the enamel that you would never know was there, and then it settles into the bone of the jaw itself, and slowly, over months, the jawbone begins to die inside the face. The first sign of it is toothache. Toothache that does not stop, does not ease, and does not respond to anything anybody can offer you. Then swelling. Then discharge, and a smell that the other women recognize immediately. And then the bone itself begins to come away in pieces. The condition has a name on the factory floor. The women who work there call it Phossy jaw, and they know exactly what it means when it starts, and in an unlit room, in the dark, the affected bone gives off a faint greenish light of its own. That is the phosphorus, still burning in the bone. The only treatment available is to remove the jaw entirely, surgically. The alternative is that it simply keeps spreading until it reaches the brain. Of the recorded cases at that one single factory, across 15 years, 19% of those women died of it. 19%. Very nearly 1 in every 5. From the work of making matches, to be sold for a farthing a box. Then, in June of this year, 2 writers publish an article about exactly what is happening on that factory floor, Annie Besant and Herbert Burroughs, in a small campaigning newspaper called The Link, on the 23rd of June, 1888. And the company's response is to write out a statement denying all of it, and then demand that their own workers put their names to it. The women refuse to sign, every one of them. So the company picks one of them out and dismisses her, and 1,400 of them walk out of the gates, not organized, not funded, not led by any union or any man from outside. 3 weeks later, the company gives in completely, takes the woman back, drops the fines, and agrees to meet the workers directly. Hold on to that one. It happens in July, and it is the only clean, total victory anybody wins in this entire film. Because outside that factory there is something else waiting for all of them, and this one is in the air itself, over the whole city. London burns coal in well over 1 million separate chimneys, every hour of every winter day, and that smoke does not go anywhere at all. So when fog forms over the river, the soot and the sulfur bind straight into it, and at that point it stops being weather altogether. It becomes thick enough that you genuinely cannot see your own hand held out in front of you. And they call it a pea-souper. In December of 1873, one single fog sat over this city for 3 days and killed over 700 people. 7 years after that, another one killed somewhere in the region of 2,000 across just a few weeks. More than a battle would, and that is not a natural disaster. That is not weather. That is a city slowly breathing in everything that it has made. And then there is the water, which is the oldest of all the problems here, and by a very long way the worst of them. In 1854, cholera breaks out around Broad Street in Soho, and it moves through the district faster than anybody can count the dead. A doctor named John Snow maps every single death by hand, house by house, door by door on foot, marking each one on a street plan. and they cluster tightly and unmistakably around one single public water pump, so he goes to the parish board and has the handle taken off it. The deaths fall away. And with that, Jon Snow has just proved that cholera travels through the water supply and not through the air. And almost nobody believes him. The accepted cause remains bad air, foul smell, miasma. Snow dies 4 years later, still disbelieved. He dies during the same summer that the Thames stank so violently that Parliament soaked its curtains in chloride of lime and could not sit. And only then does London build sewers. 82 miles of main intercepting sewer under an engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. By the middle of the 1870s, they are finished. And cholera in this city, after centuries, effectively stops. So it took the smell reaching Parliament to get that done. Not the tens of thousands of dead, the smell under the windows of the men who could pay for it. Now, everything up to this point has quietly assumed that you are still standing, still working. So consider what happens on the day that you cannot. If you run out of absolutely everything, there is exactly one place in this country that is legally obliged to take you in, the workhouse casual ward, and it has been deliberately designed from the ground up to be the very worst option available to any human being. That is not an accident of poor funding, or neglect, or indifference. That is stated policy. It is written down, in the act, on purpose. The declared intention is to make the experience so disagreeable that you will hesitate, genuinely hesitate, before ever coming back through that door again. You are given a room, some loose straw on a board, a few rags for a covering, and a bucket in the corner for the night. You are given skilly, thin oatmeal gruel and water, and you pay for that gruel and for the straw with labor before they let you leave. To stay 2 nights, a man breaks between 5 and 1,300 weight of granite, by hand, with a hammer through a grating in the wall, or else he picks 4 pounds of oakum. That is old tarred ship's rope, unpicked back down into loose fibers so the Navy can buy it again, by hand, with a bent iron nail, until the tar and the hemp split his fingers open across the pads, and he keeps going anyway. And 4 pounds of oakum was more than the courts demanded from convicted criminals actually serving hard labor in prison. Understand, you are not being punished. You have committed no crime at all. You have not been sentenced. You asked for shelter for 1 night. Women pick half that weight, or else do 9 hours of washing, scrubbing, and needlework instead, which is not in any sense the lighter option. And families entering the workhouse proper for longer than a night are separated at the door. By sex and by age, immediately. Husbands from wives, and mothers from any child over the age of about 7 years old. In many cases, they will not see each other again. That separation is not incidental either, and it is not for hygiene. That is the deterrent, working exactly the way it was designed to work. So, now the number that always gets quoted about this place, and the reason that almost everybody who quotes it reads it completely wrong. The life expectancy of a laborer in the East End of London is usually given as about 19 years, but that does not mean that laborers were dying at 19. Most men who reached 20 in that district went on to reach 50 and beyond. What that number actually means is that so many children died, so young and in such numbers, that the whole average collapses down towards them. In Whitechapel, across the 1880s, roughly 25,600 children were born and registered in the parish books, and around 8,000 of them died before their 5th birthday. That is 31%, very nearly 1 child in every 3 born. So that is what the number 19 is really measuring. Not short lives at all, absent ones, lives that were never lived long enough to count. Now, in the autumn of this year, something happens in Whitechapel that the rest of London finally, at long last, cannot ignore anymore. And it is not the poverty. The poverty had been sitting there, in plain sight, documented and mapped and written about for 50 solid years. It takes a murderer, and that, honestly, is the part of all of this that is worth sitting with for a moment. Reporters come into Whitechapel to cover the killings, because that sells newspapers, and what they find, when they get there, are the lodging houses. And so they start writing about the rent instead, about the courts, the wages, the water, the overcrowding, and about the rope. Charles Booth is already out walking these same streets, coloring in a map of London by income, house by house, street by street. The lowest grade on Booth's map is solid black, and he labels it the lowest class, and the old nickel is solid, unbroken black across every street. Within 10 years of this, the old nickel is demolished entirely and cleared, and it took every single thing in this film to finally get that done. So do not picture the fog as weather. Picture the rope, and picture the man who walks the length of it at 5 in the morning and cuts it. If you want to keep going into places like this one, subscribe to Coldest Hour. And tell me down in the comments which of those 3 beds you would have paid for. The penny, the 2 pence, or the 4 pence.